At his party, my stepson handed me a funny apron and a mop. The laughter died when I read what was written on my real gift. It started with the invitation. Brandon sent it through a group chat, flashy and full of promises for surprises. My name is Victor, 68, retired from machining in Michigan, married to Claire for 22 years. I'd raised Brandon since he was 12, like my own. Paid his college, co-signed his mortgage. Lately, he'd mocked me in small ways, but I shrugged it off. Claire was thrilled, her eyes shining. Our boy's doing great, she said. I nodded, though the invite barely named me. Still, I dressed up, ready to celebrate. The banquet hall buzzed downtown, gold balloons everywhere. Music thumped, champagne flowed. Brandon hugged friends, but nodded at me coolly. It stung, but I smiled for Claire. Halfway through, he grabbed the mic. Time to honor my stepdad's contributions. Guests clapped. I walked up, heart warming a bit. Claire teared up. I had no clue. He handed me a gift bag, grinning like a fox. I pulled out the apron, world's best made. Laughter exploded. Then the mop. My face burned. Claire's smile faded. I chuckled weakly. But wait, he said, the real gift's in the envelope. Just before you continue to watch, Joe would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage him to keep his streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. Alright, back to the story. I opened the envelope, hands shaking from the crowd's eyes. The certificate inside looked fake at first, like a joke award. But the words hit like a punch. One-way bus ticket back to retirement town, because your generation is done. Roars of laughter filled the hall. Someone yelled, "Read it again." My chest tightened, humiliation washing over me like cold water. Claire grabbed my arm. "Victor, don't make a scene," she whispered. I tucked it away, smiled stiffly, and stepped down. Inside, I boiled. Decades of sacrifice, mocked like trash. Brandon strutted, friends toasting him. Claire smoothed it over. He didn't mean it. But I knew better. This was war. The ride home was dead silent. Claire reached for my hand. I pulled away, staring out. She mumbled excuses, he's immature. My jaw clenched. No, this was contempt. That night, I dug out a dusty folder from my office. Student loans I paid, mortgage papers I co-signed, car down payment receipts. Proof his life stood on my back. While he mocked me, I had leverage. I remembered the mortgage. Without me, he'd sink. The apron seemed small now. I needed to check how deep he relied. Next morning, I'd visit the bank. Halfway through the evening, Brandon grabbed the microphone with a flourish. The room quieted as he scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on me. Folks, let's give it up for my stepdad, Victor, and his lifelong contributions to our family. Polite claps rippled through the guests. Claire's eyes shimmered with tears, her hand squeezing mine. I felt a flicker of warmth. Maybe he'd finally show some gratitude. I walked toward the stage, nodding at familiar faces, my heart thumping a bit faster. Brandon slapped my back like we were old pals. You've been there through thick and thin, Vic, time to honor that. The crowd cheered louder. Claire beamed from her seat, dabbing her eyes. I stood there, awkward under the lights, wondering what this was about. For a second, I thought maybe a nice watch or a plaque. After all, I'd footed his college bills, co-signed that house loan. He reached behind the podium and pulled out a colorful gift bag, his grin wide and mischievous, like a kid hiding a prank. Open it up, stepdad. This one's special. Laughter bubbled up from the front row. I reached in, fingers brushing something soft. The room watched, buzzing with anticipation. I had no idea this was the setup for my downfall. I pulled out the bright red apron, unfolding it slowly. Glittery letters spelled out, "World's Best Made." The crowd erupted in laughter, phones flashing as people snapped pictures. Brandon doubled over, wiping fake tears. Perfect for all that cleaning up after us you've done. He thrust a mop into my hands, bowing like a servant in some bad comedy skit. My face burned hot, ears ringing from the roars. Claire's smile faltered, her eyes darting away. I forced a chuckle, holding up the apron like it was funny, but inside, it cut deep, like a knife twisting in an old wound. Years of wiping his messes, paying his way, reduced to this gag. Guests hooted, one yelling, "Put it on." Brandon egged them on, his smirk sharp as a razor. I waved it off, trying to play along, but my hands shook. The mop felt heavy, like carrying all those unspoken insults. Claire mouthed, "It's just a joke." But it wasn't. This was his way of saying I was nothing but help. The laughter died down a bit, and Brandon leaned in. But wait, the real gift is inside the envelope at the bottom. My stomach dropped. I fished it out, the white paper crisp against my sweaty palm. The room leaned in, eager for more fun. Inside the small white envelope was a certificate, crisp and printed like something official. At first, I thought it was another gag, maybe a fake award or a silly coupon to match the apron. But as I read the words, my blood ran cold. One-way bus ticket back to retirement town, because your generation is done. The crowd exploded in laughter, louder than before, phones clicking away. Someone in the back shouted, "Read it again." My chest tightened like a vice, humiliation crashing over me in waves. I stood there, frozen on stage, the mop still in one hand, the paper shaking in the other. Brandon wiped tears from his eyes, hooting like he'd pulled off the prank of the year. Claire's face had gone pale, her forced smile cracking at the edges. The room spun a bit, all those eyes on me, judging, mocking. Years of busting my back for this kid, and this was my thanks, a public send-off like I was yesterday's trash. I folded the certificate slowly, stuffing it back in the envelope. The laughs kept coming, but inside, something snapped. Claire grabbed my arm from the side of the stage, whispering urgently, "Victor, please don't make a scene." I nodded, but my mind was already plotting. I smiled stiffly, tucking the envelope into my pocket, and stepped down from the stage amid lingering chuckles. Inside, I was boiling like a kettle left too long on the stove. Decades of sacrifice, paying his tuition, co-signing that house, even buying his first suit for job interviews, reduced to a cheap joke about being old and useless. Brandon strutted around like a peacock, high-fiving friends, while his pals toasted him with more champagne. Claire pulled me aside, her voice low. "He didn't mean it that way, Victor. It's just his sense of humor." Humor? It felt like a slap with a wet rag. I bit my tongue, nodding as the party swirled on, but my fists clenched in my pockets. The apron dangled from my arm like a badge of shame, the mop propped against a chair. Guests patted my back, saying, "Good sport," but their eyes held pity. Brandon didn't even glance my way again, too busy basking in his glory. Claire kept glancing at me, worried, but I waved her off. No scene, not here. But the truth hit me like a freight train. Brandon had just declared war, thinking I was too old to fight back. He had no idea what this retired machinist could engineer. The quiet ride home stretched like a bad dream that wouldn't end. Claire gripped the wheel, her knuckles white, while I stared out at the passing streetlights, each one blurring into the next. She reached for my hand once, but I pulled away, the sting of the party still fresh. "Victor, he's just immature," she muttered, her voice thin as paper. "You know how Brandon likes to show off for his friends." My jaw clenched tighter with every excuse, like she was twisting the knife he'd already plunged in. Immature? No, this was deeper, pure contempt, wrapped in a joke to make it sting less for everyone else. The apron and mop sat in the back seat, mocking me silently. Claire kept glancing over, her eyes pleading. It was just a bit of fun. Don't let it ruin the night. Fun? For who? Not the guy who'd scraped together every penny for his college fund while working double shifts. I stayed silent, letting the miles tick by. She sighed, turning up the radio to fill the void. But in my head, the laughter echoed on. This wasn't immaturity. This was a declaration, loud and clear. And I wasn't about to let it slide without a fight. That night, after Claire went to bed whispering more apologies, I slipped into my home office, the one room in the house that still felt like mine. Dust motes danced in the lamplight as I rummaged through the filing cabinet, pulling out a forgotten ledger, a thick folder yellowed with age. Inside were copies of every check I'd written for Brandon's student loans, the mortgage cosign papers that got him his fancy house, even receipts for the down payment on his first car, a shiny sedan he'd crashed twice before learning to drive straight. I had records of everything. Birthday gifts, emergency bailouts when he overspent, even the tuition for that fancy business degree he bragged about. While Brandon mocked me at his party, thinking I was just an old fool with a mop, I held proof that his entire adult life was built on my support, like a house of cards stacked on my back. Page after page, the numbers added up to hundreds of thousands, sacrifices I'd made without a second thought. Claire had always said I was too generous. Now, staring at the folder, Anger turned to resolve. These weren't just papers. They were leverage. I decided to weaponize them, turn his joke into his wake-up call. I remembered I had co-signed his mortgage loan back when he was fresh out of college, dreaming big but scraping by. Without my name on that paper, the bank would have laughed him out the door. If anything happened to pull me off that loan, Brandon's fancy house, the one he bragged about online, would crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. Suddenly, the apron and mop seemed like small potatoes compared to the leverage sitting right there in my filing cabinet, gathering dust but packing a punch. My humiliation from the party had cleared the fog, like wiping grime off a window to see the storm coming. No more blind trust. This was clarity, sharp as a fresh blade. I sat there in the dim office light, flipping through the old agreement, my finger tracing the signatures. His scrawl next to mine, like we were partners. Partners? He'd treated me like hired help. The thought fueled me, turning hurt into a quiet fire. But rushing in blind wouldn't do. I needed facts, solid ground before pulling any triggers. How deep did his reliance go? Was he current on payments, or slipping? The bank would know. Tomorrow, I'd pay a visit, casual as could be. Brandon had handed me the tools for his own lesson. Now I'd use them. The next morning, I walked into the bank where Brandon had his mortgage, the same branch I'd dragged him to years ago to seal the deal. The loan officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Harlan, recognized me right away. "Mr. Hayes, good to see you. What brings you in?" I kept it light, saying I was just checking on old accounts. She pulled up the file, no questions asked. My clean record opened doors. What she confirmed hit like a gut punch of satisfaction. Without my co-signature, Brandon never would have qualified back then, his credit too thin. Worse for him, he was already behind on a few payments. Nothing huge yet, but enough to raise red flags. "He's been warned," she said, frowning at the screen. "One more slip, and we start proceedings." I thanked her politely, my face neutral, but inside, I walked out with a smirk wider than the Grand Canyon. The sun hit my face like a pat on the back. Brandon thought I was disposable, some old relic to mock at parties. He had no idea I held the strings to his whole setup, the house, the lifestyle, all dangling from my goodwill. Pulling my name off that loan would yank the rug out. But timing was key. I'd let him feel secure a bit longer, then watch the show. That evening, Claire cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes pleading like a kid caught with a hand in the cookie jar. "Victor, please forgive and forget," she begged, twisting her napkin. Brandon was just expressing himself. "You're being too sensitive about a silly joke." I set down my coffee mug and looked her straight in the eye, calm but firm. "Would you laugh if he handed you a made apron in front of everyone, Claire? Called you useless and done?" Her mouth opened, then shut quick, silence hanging heavy as a wet blanket. She wanted peace, the easy kind where we sweep dirt under the rug and pretend it's gone. But I wanted justice, the kind that cleans house for good. She sighed, turning new gadgets gleaming in selfies, wild parties with confetti storms, weekend trips to the lake with his girlfriend draped on his arm. He posted captions boasting about making it big, without a handout, like he'd bootstrapped his way from rags to riches all on his own. I scrolled through his feeds late at night, the blue glow of my phone screen casting shadows on the walls, my anger sharpening with every filtered photo. There he was, popping champagne in a rented boat, grinning like he'd conquered the world. No mention of the tuition I covered, the car I bought, the house I backed. He acted like his success floated on air, not the solid ground I'd laid brick by brick. My fingers itched to comment, to shatter his illusion, but I held back. Let him preen a little longer. He had no clue that behind the scenes, his shiny castle was built on sand, shifting and unstable. One wrong wave, and it'd all wash away. The apron joke replayed in my head, fueling the fire. He'd laughed at my age, my generation. Soon, he'd learn what real obsolescence felt like. His posts were a countdown, ticking toward zero, and I was about to pull the plug, watch his digital empire flicker out. A certified letter was drafted to the mortgage company, crisp and official. I was withdrawing as guarantor due to irreconcilable conflict with the primary borrower. My attorney, Frank, reviewed it twice, his pen scratching notes in the margins. "This'll light a fire under the bank," he said, handing it back. "They'll reevaluate his loan status immediately, credit check, payment history, the works. Without your backing, he's toast." I signed with a steady hand, imagining the look on Brandon's face when the notice hit his mailbox. Shock widening his eyes, that smug grin vanishing like smoke. For once, the laughter would be gone, replaced by the cold slap of reality. He'd scramble, phone in hand, begging the bank for mercy. But mercy wasn't in the cards, not after his party stunt. Frank sealed the envelope, stamped it certified. Sent today, arrives tomorrow. Swift action, just like you wanted. I nodded, satisfaction settling in like a warm coat on a winter day. The mop and apron sat in my garage now, harmless props in his game, but weapons in mine. He'd mocked my contributions. Now he'd feel their absence. But I didn't stop there. This was just the opening shot. More moves waited in the shadows, ready to unfold. Brandon's world was about to tilt, and I held the lever. I updated my will that afternoon, sitting in Frank's office with the scent of old leather and coffee hanging in the air. I struck Brandon's name out completely. Every dollar I'd once earmarked for him now redirected to a scholarship fund for kids from struggling families, like the ones I'd grown up with, scraping by on factory wages. Frank read it back. No inheritance, no trusts, nothing. I nodded, the pen steady in my hand. For years, I'd pictured leaving him a chunk to ease his way, a final pat on the back for the kid I'd raised. Now, I imagined him opening the document someday, eyes scanning for his windfall, finding zip. That image alone washed over me like cool water on a burn, giving me a sliver of peace amid the storm. Claire would flip if she knew, but this wasn't her call. Brandon had burned that bridge with his party stunt, turning my support into a punchline. The apron and mop? Child's play compared to this. Frank sealed the papers, his voice low. This locks him out for good. Good. He'd learned that mocking a man's legacy came with a price tag. But revenge wasn't complete until it was personal, face-to-face, where he could feel the sting up close. A week later, I invited Brandon and Claire to dinner at our house, keeping my voice casual over the phone. Nothing fancy, just family time. Brandon agreed quick, probably thinking I'd cooled off, gotten over his little joke. He showed up with that smug grin plastered on, like the party never happened, striding in with a bottle of cheap wine as a peace offering. Claire fussed over the table, setting plates like we were royalty, her eyes darting between us, hoping for harmony. Brandon poured himself a beer from my fridge without asking, popping the cap with a flourish. Smells great, Vic. You always were handy in the kitchen. The dig landed soft, but I smiled politely, letting him bask in his false comfort, chattering about his latest work win. We ate roast and potatoes, conversation light as air, weather, sports, nothing deep. Claire relaxed a bit, laughing at his stories, but I watched him like a hawk sizing up prey. He leaned back after seconds, belly full, thinking he'd dodged the bullet. I cleared the plate slow, building the moment. Dessert waited on the counter, pie from the bakery. But I had something else waiting for him after, tucked in my pocket, ready to flip the script and wipe that grin clean off. After dinner, I cleared my throat and reached under the table for the neatly wrapped box I'd prepared. Brandon eyed it with a smirk, leaning back like he expected some lame peace offering. A tie or a mug, maybe. For me? You shouldn't have, Vic. His tone dripped sarcasm, but I just smiled and slid it over. Claire watched, hopeful, as he tore the paper. Inside was a framed photo collage I'd pieced together. His college graduation, cap tossed high. Him grinning beside his first car, keys in hand. The house closing, papers signed with a flourish. Each milestone glowed under the glass. But taped beside every photo were the receipts, the checks, the loan docs proving I'd footed the bill. His smirk faded fast, color draining from his face like water down a sink. He stared, mouth half open, as the truth hit. His whole shiny life, built on my dime. Claire leaned in, confused at first, then her eyes widened. Brandon's fingers traced the frame, shaking a bit. "What is this?" he muttered, voice low. I sat back, calm as a lake at dawn. Not done yet. Then I handed him an envelope, plain and white, watching his Adam's apple bob as he took it. He opened the envelope slow, like it might bite, his smirk long gone. Inside was a photocopy of the mortgage notice I'd drafted with Frank, the one withdrawing me as guarantor, stamped and official. His eyes scanned the words, widening as the meaning sank in. Without my backing, the bank would come calling, his payments already spotty. His hands trembled, just like mine had on that stage with his cruel certificate clutched tight. Claire gasped, hand flying to her mouth, her face a mix of shock and dawning horror. "Victor, what have you done?" she whispered. Brandon's chair scraped back, his breath coming short. I leaned back in my chair, sipping water cool as ice, and said plain, "Now we're even." The room went dead quiet, pie forgotten on plates. He stared at me, then the paper, crumpling it in his fist. Claire reached for him, but he pulled away, eyes locked on mine. Anger flashing hot, then something else, like fear creeping in. But Brandon's reaction took me by surprise. Instead of exploding right there, he stood up slow, face twisting, and muttered, "You think this fixes anything? You're just proving you're the bitter old man I joked about." He stormed toward the door, but I knew the real blast was coming. Brandon erupted like a volcano finally blowing its top, his face twisting red as he shouted, "You're ruining my life." He slammed his fist on the table so hard the plates jumped, coffee sloshing over rims. "Fix this now. You owe me." I stayed calm, sipping my coffee slow, letting his words bounce off like rain on a tin roof. Claire jumped up, hands fluttering. "Brandon, please, Victor's your father figure." But he waved her off, eyes wild on me. "Father?" He's a bitter old man clinging to control. The envelope crumpled in his grip, veins bulging on his neck. I met his stare even, saying nothing, watching the smug kid I'd raised unravel like cheap yarn. Claire tugged his arm, whispering, "Let's talk later." But he shook free, storming toward the door, slamming it behind him so hard the frame rattled, pictures tilting on the walls. The house went silent, Claire sinking back with tears in her eyes. For the first time since the party, I felt lighter, like shedding a heavy coat after a long winter. No more carrying his weight. He'd declared war with his jokes. I'd fired back with facts. Claire looked at me, shaken. "Victor, was that necessary?" I nodded. "Necessary. Overdue." But the fallout was just beginning, ripples spreading wide. 2 days later, my phone buzzed like an angry bee, Brandon's name flashing. I let it ring twice before picking up, leaning back in my recliner. His voice cracked frantic on the line. "Victor, the bank's frozen parts of my account. They scheduled a meeting to reevaluate the loan. Said without your guarantee, everything's at risk." He begged like a kid caught stealing cookies. "Please, come with me. Tell them it's a mistake." I paused, letting the silence stretch, then chuckled low. "Sorry, son. I'm busy polishing my mop and apron. Got some cleaning up to do." The other end went dead quiet, delicious as stolen pie, his breath hitching like he'd been punched. "You can't do this," he whispered finally. "That's my house." I hung up without another word, satisfaction warming me better than coffee. Claire overheard from the kitchen, her face pale. "Was that Brandon?" I nodded. "Bank's calling his bluff." She wrung her hands, but said nothing. He'd thought me disposable. Now reality bit back. That was when the first cracks appeared in his world. The fancy facade splintering, friends whispering, bills piling. No more strutting online. He'd learned fast that mocking the hand that fed you left you starving. But more cracks waited, widening slow and sure. Word spread quickly among Brandon's circle like wildfire through dry grass, his flashy lifestyle crumbling under the weight of whispers and missed payments. Friends who'd laughed at his party jokes now dodged his calls, their invites drying up once he couldn't pick up the tab for rounds or weekends away. "Sorry, man, busy," they'd text, but I heard through the grapevine they were mocking him behind his back. Mr. Big Shot's going small time. The same crowd that roared at my apron now snickered at his repossessed car, towed right from his driveway in broad daylight. Social media went quiet. No more boast posts, just silence like a ghost account. Claire got the calls from worried aunts, asking if Brandon was okay, her face pinching with each one. "He's learning," I'd say, but inside, satisfaction bloomed like spring after a hard winter. Karma had slipped in quiet, turning his arrogance into isolation. The bank had started proceedings, letters stacking on his counter like unpaid bills. No more yacht dreams or girlfriend getaways. He'd built his world on show, but without my backbone, it folded like cheap cardstock. And Karma still had one more gift wrapped and waiting, ready to unwrap at just the right moment. A month later, Brandon's girlfriend dumped him cold when she spotted the foreclosure letter glaring from his kitchen counter, red stamps screaming, "Final notice." She packed her bags that night, screeching about losers and liars as she slammed the door, tires squealing down the street. He tried to spin it my way, calling Claire in tears. Victor's fault. He pulled the rug. But word got around fast. Everyone seeing the truth like daylight breaking through clouds. He'd mocked the man who'd carried him for years, and now his empire of ego lay in ruins. No friends to toast with, no girl to pose for pics, just empty rooms echoing his regrets. Claire fretted, wringing her hands. He's suffering, Victor. I nodded. Actions have echoes. The party laughter that haunted me now rang hollow for him, alone in that house teetering on the edge. His arrogance had built a lonely tower, and without my support, it toppled slow but sure. No more strutting, just a guy facing mirrors he'd shattered himself. And he was alone, staring at the mess, mop in hand, but no one to clean it for him. The war he'd started with a joke ended in silence. His world shrunk to echoes. Claire begged me to reconsider one evening in the living room, her voice cracking like thin ice underfoot. He's still my son, Victor. Can't you see he's learned his lesson? Help him, just this once. She paced, hands twisting her necklace, eyes pleading like they had when Brandon was a kid scraping knees. I set down my newspaper, meeting her gaze steady. He's your son, Claire, but he's not my responsibility anymore. I raised him, paid his way, and he threw it back with a mop and a joke. She stopped, shoulders slumping. For the first time, she admitted it soft. He went too far. That party was cruel. She didn't like my revenge, the withdrawn guarantee, the rewritten will. It gnawed at her like a bad tooth. But she couldn't deny its justice, the way it balanced the scales after years of my quiet giving. It hurts to watch him suffer, she whispered. I nodded. Hurts more to be mocked in front of a crowd. We sat in silence, the clock ticking like a countdown. She hugged me then, tentative, like testing a bridge. Peace hung fragile between us, but solid enough to hold. Then came Brandon's desperate knock at my door, sharp and urgent in the quiet night, like thunder after calm. He stood there on the porch, disheveled as a storm-tossed scarecrow, holding the same mop and apron he'd gifted me at his party. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed red like he'd cried a river, his voice cracking rough as gravel. Please, Victor, he whispered, shifting foot to foot. I need your help. The bank's taking everything. My house, my life. I was wrong. I'm sorry. The mop dangled limp from his hand. The apron crumpled like yesterday's news. I looked at him for a long moment, taking in the man I'd raised, now shrunk small by his own choices. Claire hovered behind me in the hall, her breath held, but I didn't glance back. Memories flashed, paying his loans, signing his papers, watching him thrive on my sweat. Then the party laughter, the cruel words on that certificate. You made your bed, I said quiet, no anger left, just fact. His face crumpled further, a plea dying on his lips. I quietly closed the door, the click final as a lock snapping shut. Through the window, I watched him slump away into the dark, shoulders bowed. Claire touched my arm, silent. No more words needed. My revenge was complete, not in shouts or fights, but in that simple shut door. The weight lifted, light as air. For weeks afterward, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years, like a storm finally passing and leaving clear skies behind. The apron hung in my garage, not as a wound festering, but as a trophy gleaming under the work light, a reminder of the line I'd drawn and held. I'd proven I wasn't disposable, some old tool to be mocked and tossed aside. Respect must be earned, not spat on with cheap laughs and cruel words. Brandon learned the hard way that laughter can turn to silence when the truth steps into the room, cold and unyielding. His call stopped after that door shut. Claire mentioned he'd moved in with a cousin, scraping by on odd jobs. His big dreams shrunk to survival mode. She and I talked more openly now, our evenings quiet but honest, no more tiptoeing around his shadow. The house felt lighter, my steps surer, like shedding chains I'd carried too long. Friends nodded approval when they heard the tale, saying I'd done what any man would. And me? I finally had peace, deep as a still lake at dawn, unbroken by regrets. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply walking away, leaving the echoes to fade on their own. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.